Hello, my name is Ben, and today we are shooting a video for the Wandering Ogre Etsy shop. I'm going to show you how to build one of these pumpkin topiaries set on one of these bar stool, ringside little stools. Super cute, old-fashioned, kind of got the worn look on them and everything like that. What you'll need are some foam pumpkins. These pumpkins here, in varying sizes and shapes. These ones here, I've already gone ahead and painted. So they'll come in the traditional oranges and whites. I went ahead and used some white pumpkins, painted them again to have the shape that I actually wanted. I went ahead and used orange and white pumpkins, painted them brown and red for the color scheme that we're going for here. It's getting close to fall and football season, and so I have videos or have the color scheme set up to kind of go for some local teams here in Arkansas and Oklahoma. The way that I put together our topiaries is I use this threaded rod. Threaded rod can be purchased at any hardware store, usually in 6 and 8 foot lengths. They have smaller lengths also. These are cut to 16 inches. It's going to vary depending on the size of your pumpkins. You're going to want to be able to measure from the base of this pumpkin all the way down here to the stool when you stack your pumpkins up. Then add just a little bit into the bottom, just to give you the actual length that you're going to need to be able to tighten it down. And I'll give you closer up shots of some of that stuff here later. You need these ceiling hangers. They're designed specifically for going into like drywall and hanging things from your ceiling. They'll hang lamps and things like that. You'll need nuts and fender washers. Your fender washers, it's just a big washer designed not to tear through things when you tighten stuff down. It'll give a larger surface area. And then your nuts, you want to make sure that they fit your threaded rod. So if you can see, just make sure that your nut and your threaded rod are the same. So threaded rod comes in different sizes. This is 1/4 inch. The 1/4 inch I find works real well for this. It's not overkill, but it gives a nice sturdy piece to go through all of your pumpkins. And here, this fender washer, as you can see, it's much larger than the nut, as where the nut would actually rip through something. These large fender washers here will give a lot of surface area. You can see the paint there still stuck on my fingernails from painting all those pumpkins. And then these guys here, which is what goes into drywall, it compresses, shoves through a hole, then opens up like that. You'll go ahead and attach these eventually, and again, we'll get that in the process. You'll attach these to the threaded rod also, and then we'll be able to shove it into the pumpkins. It'll open up just like that and be able to hold into the pumpkin while you tighten this threaded rod, holding all of your pumpkins together and making it so that way when the dogs or the kids knock it over, or the wind, if you have it set up on the porch, knocks over the topiary, it doesn't fall into pieces. So the first thing we need to do is decide what pumpkins are going to go on the base and what pumpkins are going to go on the top. And that's going to change how we manipulate and cut these pumpkins. Hi, Lily, say hi. And then go find something to do. So in this case here, we're going with the brown one, our football colored pumpkin. Then we're going to the white pumpkin and then our red pumpkin. And we need to remove these stems. The easiest thing I found is these box cutting knives. I'll take one of these and I just kind of plunge it in. I'm not going to try to cut it all the way around. I don't want to cut into myself. I never want to pull the knife towards me. And I don't want to cut into my hand holding it. So if I just plunge and kind of rock it, I find that it works real well in this foam. So then I can just take and plunge in again, rock it back this way, pull it out, plunge in, rock it around. Now you may have a better technique for this, or maybe use a saw. I just found that this works real well for me, because what I'm trying not to do is damage the pumpkin up here at the top. Even though this pumpkin is going to go on the bottom, basically outside of a 3-inch circle here in the middle, you're going to be able to see that pumpkin, and I don't want to damage, ruin the paint, or ruin the shape of the pumpkin at all. I want to maintain the pumpkin's integrity as much as possible. So just plunge and kind of manipulate it, wiggle it back and forth seems to work the best. After you got all the way around, the stems just pop right off. So there's not a need to cut down to the pumpkin and cut the whole thing out. I like to have that in there. It provides a little more structure in my opinion. Keeps the whole thing together and adds a little more of a sturdy base all the way through the pumpkin. So I'll go ahead and just do that same kind of plunge and wiggle on this next white one, because again the white one's going to have the red pumpkin go on top of it. So we need to remove the stem from this one also. The key when removing these stems is what you want to do is kind of come down at an angle, and the goal is to remove the stem at remove enough of the stem that it clears the edge of the pumpkin. Because if you notice, a lot of these foam pumpkins will come up and they'll tilt back down into the stem before the stem comes up. If you can cut down at an angle and remove that stem, so that way when these pumpkins sit on top of each other, it sits nice and flush with the ridges of the pumpkin, and where the stem was is completely recessed. That's the goal. So here it seems that we might be touching just a little bit. So again, I'll take that same technique, kind of plunge, and I do cut a little bit more here, but we're putting such a thin material on, it's not too bad and I can control it. And notice how I'm keeping my hand on the other side of the knife. That way, if it does cut, I'm not going to cut my hand while I'm carving off the foam off the pumpkin. Okay, in this case here, you can see there's a little bit of a hole, and that's okay too. I'll bring this up here and show you a little closer what I was going for here though. And so you can kind of see that there's the ridges, but when you turn this pumpkin like that, they disappear because they're completely recessed underneath the outside of the pumpkin here. It kind of comes down and goes inside, and when the other pumpkin sits on top of it, it won't hit that at all. These are super simple and super easy to put together. I've seen a lot of these put together with hot glue, contact cement, other things like that. And I have built them that way before also. Here in the fall and the winter, we do tend to have a lot of storms, and I like to decorate outside on the front porch with these, and the wind would blow them over and they would fall apart, and then you have to re-glue them together and things like that, just because the impact of them. My topiaries were probably like 5 to 6 feet tall, stacked of pumpkins. What I decided to do is come up with a way that we could then bond these together in a semi-permanent but very structurally sound way, and that's where this threaded rod came through. When they're put together and completed, they're very sturdy and strong. They're not going to fall apart. If this falls over, I don't want to scuff the paint, but if it falls over, it's not going to separate. There's nothing that's going to break these apart. You might do touch-ups or something like that with any colors or the leaves that you want to do or paint, but the structure itself is going to stay intact because that threaded rod goes through everything. And that really was the goal, is make something so structurally sound and tough that it can go through weather, it can go through the dogs or the kids knocking it over. And so that's kind of the design we went with. The other benefit of this is that if you need to break these down for any reason, whether you want to break them down to store them in a smaller container or something like that, or if you want to add things and elements in between it, you can come through and you can take this apart by just pulling off that nut and washer there in the bottom. And when you take that off, you can separate all of these pieces out. You can then add decorations, add layers in between this. Just as long as you're not adding any more thickness to it, you can use the same piece of threaded rod. Because once you do stick that threaded rod in this final pumpkin, in this top pumpkin here, with these hangers, you're gonna have a hard time getting that out of there. So this piece is permanent, but everything else you can kind of separate, add a layer in there if you wanted to, different types of leaves or material, burlap, and then put it all back together. So the way that we attach these all is that this one here has already got a hole that you can kind of see there. We're going to go ahead and flip it over and find the middle. Now, I don't have to be 100% perfect. That's what I really like about this project, is that because of what we're doing and how we're putting these together, you can have a little freedom to be a little off, because the topiaries, they look great. Even if there's just a small quarter-inch difference, you're not going to notice it. If you are a perfectionist, feel free to set up a ruler, guide, and mark this spot in the middle and work your drill bits up to a larger size. I also don't use a quarter-inch drill bit. I use a much larger drill bit because, again, it allows me some flexibility. And using the larger drill bit, I can then shift and move these pumpkins if I need to, up to a quarter or an inch either way to kind of align the look that I'm going for. Because some of these pumpkins have higher sides and lower sides on them, and you kind of want to shift them as you tighten everything down. So what I did there is I went ahead and drilled a hole in the center of the bottom of the first pumpkin. We don't have to drill a hole in the top. That's our middle pumpkin and the white one. Here, we need to drill a hole on both sides. I wiggle it around a little bit because of this foam. It does tear, it does flex, and it does kind of move a little bit. If you wiggle the drill bit, it'll clear it out a little, clear out the hole a little bit better. If you wiggle it too much, you will tear the whole foam though, so don't get crazy. Also, when I'm drilling, I'll find where I want to set the drill bit, and then I apply pressure to the drill bit. What I found is that the drill bits will walk, and if you just start to drill slowly without applying, pushing it down into the foam a little bit, the drill bit and the drill bit will tend to walk. You can eliminate that by going with a really small drill bit at first and then working up to a larger drill bit. But I like the fact that I can do this whole project in just a few minutes. And so, to me, when I'm trying to knock some of these out for my Etsy shop, so in this case here, this scheme, I'm going to do 12 of them. Time is of the essence, and so I want to be able to get through these pretty quick. So I've already got both my holes in the bottom and top of these two. The top pumpkin, we are only placing a hole in the bottom. Now that one I cut wider, and I wiggled the drill a lot more than I did on the other ones. And there's a reason for that. And that's to be able to fit this piece through. So this piece here compacts down, but that whole unit's got to be able to go through this hole. So you want to make that hole big enough that this will fit into it easily enough. And again, you're not going to see that hole when you compress all of these pumpkins together. They will make a nice tower, a nice topiary, and it's going to hide all of those holes in the middle. So it's okay to have a little bit larger hole. You don't want a giant hole. A little bit larger to make your life easier helps out a whole bunch. All right, so we'll wipe some of this mess off right over here. There is a little bit of mess in the drilling process and the cutting process with the foam, so hopefully it doesn't make our space here look too bad. So again, feel free to measure. Take your time, measure this, create a nice X. And when you do that, you'll have the center marked on this by basically measuring on these are 8-inch tops. If you measure 8 inches across, 8 inches across, you will have a center point in there where those two lines cross. That being said, like I mentioned before, I'm okay with it being just a tad off. I don't think it affects the overall process very much. So I just go ahead and punch that through. The next step here is I take my threaded rod and I slide my fender washer onto the threaded rod, and I take my 1/4 inch nut and I attach my 1/4 inch nut right there onto it. Now I've got that base. I don't want that to be on very far because I'm not looking to have a long piece of threaded rod sticking out the bottom of the stool. So I try to keep that pretty short, and I need all the extra space for that top piece when I eventually get to threading it through. Lily, please don't hide there. Come down, go up. Cutie pie. All right, now I'm going to take this threaded rod and I'm going to stick it through the bottom of my little stool. As you can tell, the fender washer does a good job holding it there, and that fender washer is going to allow that nut to spin and not dig into the wood. Next, we're going to go on our pumpkins in order. So the next pumpkin that goes on here is our brown pumpkin, our football colored pumpkin. Slide it on, drop it down, and then get some of that foam off there. Our white pumpkin. Slide it on. And we gotta line that up. This is where that larger drill bit comes in handy. When I first made these, I used a 1/4 inch drill bit because the threaded rod that I was using was a 1/4 inch. And what I struggled with was finding the hole to put the threaded rod through. And when I went to put the threaded rod through the pumpkins, I ran into the issue of trying to get it through. It took so much time because I was trying to find that 1/4 inch hole on one side of the pumpkin and on the other side of the pumpkin, which turned out to be really difficult to do, especially when you're attaching it through multiple pumpkins and you're attaching it to things like this stool and so forth. So I found out through trial and error that if you use a bigger drill bit, that you wiggle it around, you can make a little bit bigger holes, that it doesn't affect the strength whatsoever. You don't see the holes, and you get the benefit of having a little bit of an easier time of putting everything together. All right, so this process here, I've got the hanger here on. I threaded it onto the rod. I'm pinching it down right here. I'm pinching that piece down. I'm also holding tension onto that threaded rod going through everything, because if I let go of it, it's going to drop back down. So I'm holding some tension onto that. I'm going to pinch it at the bottom. This is a step that helps with smaller hands and smaller fingers. If you can get your hand between these pumpkins a little easier than I can. My big wandering ogre fingers have a tough time getting through there. Now this part here, you want to shove that pumpkin, we have that big hole on there, enough far enough down to basically be able to hold the pumpkin on there. And then we're going to go ahead and use the chin, and your other hand down here is going to hold the threaded rod, and then you're going to push the pumpkin down until you hear that pop. I think you might have heard it. I don't know if the microphone picked it up because I'm not using a wireless mic, but that pop was that spring opening up on the inside of there. So now I can let go of this threaded rod, and it drops down, and it dropped down about ½ an inch, and it's just hanging down here. But it's now in there, and it's going to bind. As I tighten this bottom nut, it's going to bind on the inside of the thumb, which is going to allow us to hold all 3 of these pumpkins together and then hold it to this stool. Something you can do also with these, with this technique is just attach the pumpkin. So you don't have to attach it to something wood like this. You can just attach the pumpkin and leave the threaded rod sticking out the bottom. So some of these, I'll sell a kit on my Etsy shop that just has 3 pumpkins, and they're attached to a threaded rod, and that threaded rod sticks out an extra, 12 inches, 6 inches, depending on what the customer needs. Then they can take that threaded rod, you can stick it right in the ground and use it like that in your yard or a pot. Or you can take and use that threaded rod and attach it to other things like a topiary or something like that. Let me grab one right here that we're working on in progress. So this here is a topiary that's in the progress of being decorated. It's basically being taken from this step here, and it's going to be elevated through flowers and floral decorations and things like that. But this is 2 pumpkins here, attached with threaded rod, exactly like these. Obviously a shorter piece of threaded rod, and it's attached to where it's nice and solid. Then she went ahead, my wife, went ahead and attached it to this base here using floral foam, and then this kind of thing we found at like a resale store. So I believe this is like $5 at a resale store, so super cheap and reasonable. You can also get them at most craft stores and things like that, but they tend to be a little bit more expensive. So the floral foam is glued to this, and this here with the thread rod is slid down into it, and then she glued those together also to add a little more strength. And I'm back. So now we'll go ahead and take this, put it on the side, and I have a long ratchet with an extension. This is just a tool that I already have in my tool chest. You do not need this. You can use just a wrench that's set up for your 1/4 inch. But basically, I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down, giving all that strength through friction. Once we check it there we go. And now all of our pumpkins are attached to the stool. Nothing's loosey-goosey anymore. Everything's held nice and tough and put together. Ready to take to the next step where my wife will go through and she'll add in some floral decorations in here. I'm thinking green, some green floral in here, something to kind of give that AstroTurf turf feel from football will look perfect. And so these are going to be a fantastic decoration for the upcoming football season and the fall season coming up. I hope that this video is helpful. I hope that encourages you guys to go out and build something also like this. If you want to support me, feel free to go to my Etsy shop, The Wandering Ogre, all one word, and take a look at my goods there. And feel free to message me if you want something custom like this built and put together. We would love to be able to put that together for you and work with you on building a special project for you.